I stepped onto the moss-covered dock as twilight fell. The water lapped quietly, and reeds scraped against the rocks. I felt eyes on me, though nothing moved, as if the island was aware of my presence. I followed a narrow, overgrown path into dense brush. Fallen branches and wet leaves snapped underfoot. Every sound echoed unnaturally. The forest pressed close, and I could swear the shadows shifted when I wasn't looking. I reached a rocky outcrop at the water's edge. Waves lapped quietly, but reflections in the rippling water seemed distorted, like someone or something was hiding just beneath the surface, watching. A small clearing appeared, fog curling over moss-covered stones. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sounded amplified. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath and waiting. Near the water's edge, a small wooden boat lay half submerged, groaning with each wave. A faint metallic smell drifted. I froze, sure that unseen eyes were watching, though nothing was moving. I stepped carefully along the rocky shore, fog curling around my ankles. A shadow shifted in the mist. Nothing moved, yet I felt the unmistakable pressure of unseen eyes tracking every step I took. A narrow creek cut through the island, water bubbling over mossy stones. I saw footprints pressed into the mud, fresh but indistinct, leading into the trees. I froze, realizing I was not alone here. I reached a small inlet where the tide whispered against jagged rocks. Something glinted, a piece of metal half buried in sand. I felt the hairs on my neck rise, as if the island itself warned me to turn back. I paused at a narrow clearing. The fog thickened unnaturally, and I thought I saw a shadow detach from a tree, moving toward me, but when I blinked, it vanished. The forest felt alive and waiting. At the water's edge, an old rowboat lay overturned, barnacles clinging to its hull. Faint scratches ran across the wood, like claws or tools. I shivered, realizing I was being observed by something I could not see. I followed a narrow tidal path along the shore. The fog thickened and reflected faint moonlight on wet stones. Every small ripple in the water felt like something moving beneath the surface, unseen but aware. A thin wooden rowboat lay half hidden in the reeds. I noticed faint scratches and worn patches on the hull. The air felt heavier here, as if the island itself was observing, waiting for me to move. I reached a dense thicket where fog clung to low branches. Something brushed against a tree near me, but when I looked, there was nothing, just the forest, pressing in, silent and suffocating. I arrived at a small inlet where waves whispered against stones. A faint metallic glint caught my eye, half buried in sand. My pulse quickened, signs of human presence on this island should not exist. I paused on a rocky rise, overlooking the water. Moonlight glinted off distant waves, and I thought I saw a dark shape slip behind the reeds, just at the edge of vision, then vanish completely. I crouched behind a fallen log, straining to hear. The fog muffled distant water sounds, yet I caught the faint crunch of footsteps over rock, still deliberate, slow, and unnervingly close. My skin prickled. I stumbled into a small clearing where broken branches littered the ground. A faint smell, metallic, sharp, hung in the air. Something had been here recently, and it was watching me, though I saw nothing. I approached a narrow inlet lined with reeds. The water shimmered, but something darker shifted beneath the surface. It wasn't fish, it was deliberate, moving against the current, unseen yet threatening. My pulse raced. A low stone outcrop broke the shoreline. I saw a hand-sized imprint in wet sand, fresh and deliberate, pointing toward the forest. My throat tightened. I wasn't imagining this. Someone had been here, waiting. I climbed a small ridge, hoping for a vantage point. Moonlight illuminated a faint shadow slipping between reeds, disappearing before I could focus. Every instinct screamed danger, but there was nothing visible, just a whisper of movement. I edged along a jagged shoreline, trying to stay silent. A faint echo of footsteps, not my own, rang over the water. They weren't random, they mirrored my movements, as if something was shadowing me deliberately. I found a narrow sand spit between reeds. A discarded fishing net lay tangled in driftwood, damp and rotting. Every instinct told me someone had been here recently, watching, waiting, leaving clues I wasn't meant to see. I stumbled onto a small, rocky promontory. Moonlight caught a dark shape slipping into fog, indistinct but unnervingly deliberate. My heart raced. The island felt alive, observing every movement I made without revealing itself. I followed a narrow path between boulders. A faint metallic glint caught my aja, small knife half buried in sand. Someone had been here, and it wasn't random. Fear tightened around me like a vice. I reached a small tidal pool where moonlight reflected sharply. Ripples moved against the wind, as if something beneath the surface was deliberate. I froze. Whatever was here didn't want to be seen, but it was waiting. I hugged the shoreline, heart racing. A whisper of movement behind a cluster of reeds made me freeze. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was my own breathing and something else, just out of sight. I stumbled over uneven rocks and paused. A shadow stretched unnaturally across the shore, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. My pulse spiked. Something here was moving on its own, silent and deliberate. I paused at a small cove. Something skimmed across the water's surface, creating ripples that moved against the tide. I held my breath. Whatever it was, it knew I was here and was studying me silently. I scrambled up a low ridge, desperate for perspective. Moonlight revealed a faint figure moving along the opposite shore, too distant to see clearly. I felt eyes on me, though nothing could be seen directly. I crouched behind a boulder. A faint metallic glint reflected in the moonlight. Another discarded knife, half buried in sand. Someone had been moving ahead of me. I was not alone, and I could feel them watching every step. I reached the edge of the island's marsh. Ripples moved against the wind in shallow pools, and faint footprints pressed into mud led deeper into the reeds. I realized they had been tracking me all along. I froze behind a small cluster of rocks. A dark figure emerged briefly between the reeds, vanishing before I could focus. Its movement was deliberate, measured, and terrifying. I could feel it observing every twitch of my body. I crouched behind a boulder near the shore. The sound of a boat motor whispered in the distance, growing faint. Someone had left, but the knowledge that I had been hunted, carefully and deliberately, lingered in the night air. I stumbled back toward the kayak launch. Boot prints in mud circled the area multiple times, precise and unnervingly patient. Whoever had been here had known my path, my movements, and my fear. I reached the kayaks. Silence returned. No figure, no sound, except the water lapping against the shore. But the memory of their deliberate presence lingered. I wasn't alone, and the island would never let me forget it.